Hey everyone, it's Peter from Daydream Nation, and look who's back. It is the Parish of Rock. Welcome back, Parish. How are you going?
I'm good, thanks, Peter. Great to be back talking about one of my favourite bands, so that's always a good thing.
Absolutely. Parish and I decided that we are going to talk Status Quo again, and we are going to talk about the 1986 album, In the Army Now. As always, we're going to talk about our impressions, how we first encountered the album, do a song-by-song analysis of the album, and then just give our sort of review of the album with 2024 is. So, Parish, before I wade into your first encounters with this album, just a little bit of admin. This album came out in 1986. It was sort of like a pseudo comeback for Status Quo. Their last album was in 1983. It went to gold certification in the UK. In Germany, went to number 14. Looking through the other chart placings in Europe, it was sort of like top 20 in quite a few regions. Didn't trouble the charts in Australia, and as always, didn't trouble the charts in America. So this was the lineup of Francis Rossi, Rick Parfitt, Jeff Rich on drums, John Edwards on bass, and Andrew Brown on keyboards. Alan Lancaster had flown the coop. Even though they played Live Aid, the three of them, Rossi, Parfitt, and Lancaster. Lancaster went back to Australia, and that was it. So a completely different lineup. So Parish, what was your first encounter with this album in the day, if any?
Well, I did get it in the day. So there you go. There's the album. If you look home in, you can see the sticker that talks about including the hit singles Rolling Home and Red Sky. So that will give you the timing of when I got this before a third single that we'll talk about it a bit later on. Look, I'm a big Quo fan. I love their stuff through the 70s. I started to lose interest through the 80s. I think they started moving away from rock and to pop. And certainly the album before this, I'd kind of given up on them. And it was only because of one single in particular, which again, I'll come back to in a moment, that got me to buy the album. My view on that album, I'm going to keep to myself at the moment because it's going to come out during the discussion. So I won't say any more at this point. But yeah, I bought it after the second single. So that was kind of my introduction to the album at the time.
Well, my encounter with this album was nothing. I remember reading about it in Kerrang, and I seem to recall reading a lot of media or social commentary in the day that it was definitely a change for Quo from the classic sound. They were going much more synth pop, much more poppy, and there was kind of a backlash. That's in my vague memory, but in respect to the songs, zero, because it had zero impact in Australia. I think it would be fair to say, Parish, that in the day that this album wasn't sort of favourably received by the critics, would you say?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, well, I'd go further. My memory is it was absolutely slated by the critics.
It was absolutely panned. If you don't mind, I'd like to quote one of your favourite magazines in the day, Smash Hits, knowing that you used to be a regular reader of that.
I had every copy. The poster's up on my wall.
So reading Sylvia Patterson did a review of In the Army, and she said, in 1832 or thereabouts, Status Quo wrote a song. Since then, they've rewritten that song approximately 2,847 times, and here's another 11 versions of it. Well, it proved rather popular after all. 4 unimaginative standard Status Quo songs, a piano-bashing knees up ahoy Status Quo song, 3 Status Quo songs with synthesizer, a slow Status Quo song, 2 bland American rock band style Status Quo songs, and 1 country and western Status Quo song. So if you like the song, you won't feel let down. If you don't, this LP is safe, uninspired, predictable, and passionless. 2 out of 10. ouch.
Mm.
But I think there were a few. I think Kerrang was probably the only that was semi favourable, keeping the flag waving. But my recollection was that this album was definitely panned in the day.
I mean, interestingly, I think that review though is not on the mark. I actually think it sounds quite different to what Quo did before in many ways. So yeah, as I say, we'll get into it a bit later, the detail. But I'm not sure I'd say this is just like every other Quo album or every other Quo song. I think there is differences.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of rags in the day, like NME and smash hits, that was always carte blanche for them to slam hard rock or heavy metal and give a really cheeky, nasty review. That was just par de course. All right, let's get into the album. So, putting down the needle on the first track, and that is Rollin' Home. It went to UK number 9, so it was a top 10 hit. What do you think of this song?
Yeah, I like it actually. Written by John David, who was bass player with Dave Edmunds at the time. Produced by Dave Edmunds, one of two produced by Dave Edmunds. First single off the album, and when I heard it on the radio, I actually thought, oh, sounds like old Quo might be back. It sounded more like Quo from the 70s than I think they had done for a while. So yeah, I mean, it's not a classic song. It's not one of their best, but it's certainly half decent. It's kind of, I mean, funny enough, that reviewer for Smash Hits, if all she heard was the first song, she'd probably have been right actually to say it was just standard Quo fare, because I think it is. But I think it's decent. I think it's interesting that somebody outside of the band actually writes one of the best songs on the album. So they probably had a better ear for a Quo song than maybe Quo did at this point. And the Dave Edmunds production, I think, is good. It stands up. It's quite fulsome. So yeah, I think the album gets off to a reasonable start. Is my view.
Well, when you first hear this song, the first thing that hits you is it's very slick. It's got that slick production, and the bottom end, the bass, the drums, it doesn't have that ragged crunch of those 70s albums, which were quite rough and ready and had a bit of ragged charm. But when you listen to it, it's still got those same boogie chords underpinning the song. It's a very familiar riff that only has 3 chords. The lyrics are quite aspirational. They're wanting to be in a better place. So it's not well beating. It's not Shakespeare, but it's kind of an aspirational sort of lyric. Which is positive. One thing you notice, and this is a warning sign, or maybe a warning sign, it depends which side of the ledger you sit on, there's a lot of whirring keyboards as you go deeper into the song. So this is definitely Quo for the 80s. It's very slick. It's very much of its times, and it's a much slicker, dare I say, sophisticated production of a Quo song.
I probably should add, I'm a big Dave Edmunds fan, so that might influence my view on it. But I like Dave Edmunds' production. I always did through the 70s and the early 80s, and I think what he brings, he does. Yeah, you're right. It's not as raw, but at least he's captured, I think, the essence of Quo rather than making it just sound like an 80s pop song.
Yeah. All right. So we go to track 2. A little ditty called Calling, which was written by Bernie Frost and Francis Rossi. So what do you think of this song?
Not keen. It's got a bit of a Celtic feel, which at least makes it stand out slightly, although I think that was typical of the time, because around about that time you had Big Country, Slade had Run Away, so I think it was kind of tying into that kind of Celtic sound. It's nothing special though. It's got what I call the sort of all of the things I dislike about what I call the pop Quo era. It's I don't know, it's just bland, I guess is the best way. The worst thing I could say about this, and a few other songs on it, I could almost imagine Bucks Fizz. I don't know if Bucks Fizz is a name you're familiar with in Australia.
Oh, I remember them well.
Yeah. Making Your Mind Up, which was a Eurovision hit, sort of very poppy, manufactured. And I could almost imagine Buck Fizz doing a version of this. it's kind of got that same manufactured 80s sound to it. So I'm not that keen, but at least the Celtics bit to it does at least make it sound slightly different. But yeah, it's okay, but very bland.
I think it's Grandma Boogie. I think it's a song that is so accessible. Even the grandmas would put out their false teeth and have a bit of a dance around the carousel. And it's got boogie piano, and it reminds me. Remember an artist called Mrs. Mills?
Yeah,
Mrs. Mills. I can playing honky tonk piano. Oh man, it's so cheesy, and it's got this terrible synth line, and it just makes it sound so vaudeville and musical. This is not the Quo I love. It's kind of embarrassing.
Chaz and Dave, again, I don't know if Chaz and Dave made it to Australia.
Yes,
it kind of has that Chaz and Dave sound to it as well, I think.
Yeah, I wish I hadn't heard of Chaz and Dave, but yes, they did make it. It's terrible. But no, I broke down, this is Grandma Boogie. Even the grandmas would love it. It's just music for pleasure, music for the grandmas. All right. In Your Eyes, what do you think of this song?
Again, just so bland. It's kind of mid-paced. It's inoffensive. I don't dislike it, but I don't particularly like it. There's no energy. It's just filler, really. It's the sort of thing I probably wouldn't skip, but it's not something I'm particularly listening to when it's playing either. As I say, it's just sort of background music, really.
Yeah, again, the thing that comes to the fore, Parish, is that it's got that shiny 80s production. It's just pop rock. It's a pop song, but the vocals are the noticeable thing, because it's got a kind of a different vocal line to what you would expect a Status Quo song. It's got different phrasing. I've been a fool. I've made a mistake. It's sort of really kind of, I don't know, that sort of robotic 80s synth pop phrasing. And it's just really odd to hear the Quo do that sort of synth pop phrasing, all that new wave phrasing. Very different. And there is a crime against music where you bring the pan flute in. Those horrible synth pan flutes, which Sting used to bring in his solo albums. So, absolutely, that gets the yellow card off the pitch. Whoever brought the pan flutes into this song, yellow card.
Yeah.
There is a bit of a minor sort of comeback towards the end of the song. It kind of rallies where there's, a bit of a boogie rave up with the piano and the guitar. And it's like they're saying, hey, we're Status Quo. We'll just remind, we'll put a little bit of a scare of the real Status Quo in the song, just to remind you that you are listening to Status Quo. And then it goes back to the pop rendition of that earlier part of the song, which is just pop rock and pretty bland and pretty ordinary. Any further comments on this one, or should we go to the next one?
No, I think that's absolutely right. The least said about it, the better, probably. Let's move on.
Yeah, but folks, this is not the worst song. There are some more coming soon. Just wait. Save Me. Does this save the album?
I don't mind this. I think the riff is half decent. Don't mind the riff on it. Although it does then fall back into that kind of pop Quo after it gets starting. But it is interesting. The guitars are a little bit more interesting as well. I like the middle piece, the guitar section in the middle piece. But I think the lyrics are really are probably the most interesting bit, because it says, save me. This is the chorus. Save me, save me, save me from myself. And I think that sums up Quo on this album, really. Who needs saving for themselves? Somebody needs to have shaken them and said, this is not you. This is not what you should be doing. I think the lyrics are quite interesting because of that.
Yeah, I actually wrote here, don't mind it. Isn't it interesting? We've used the same words. It bounces around. It's jaunty. I like it slightly off the beat, and it does build up steam. It seems that Quo do have a lot of fun with this, so I think this is one of the better tracks on the album. and it's got that folksy Celtic guitar solo that you can sing to. So they love bringing those Celtic sonics into the album. There's a lot of focus on vocal hooks. There's a bit of double tracking. Yeah, I think it's one of the stronger songs on the album. So, bit of a bounce.
The other thing I'd point, the other thing I'd point out on it, which becomes more prevalent on the second side, Rick Parfitt co-wrote this. And just hold that thought, because we'll come back to that later. But yeah, I think Rick Parfitt and Francis Rossi are maybe on different pages at the moment when they're producing this album, recording this album.
Do you think the lyrics were talking about their substance abuse issues? Because they were in a horrible...
I think they are. And there's another song a lot later on the album that's very, very much into that. Yeah, so I think you're right. I think that is exactly what the song is about.
Yeah, because I was just reading about Live Aid and the middle 80s, and the testimony from the band was they were really in a coke and alcohol haze, and they don't even remember a lot of this. So I just wonder.
No, well, I can't remember which song it is, but it's one of the first two songs that when they play it on Top of the Pops, towards the end, Rick Parfitt falls over onto the drums and knocks the drums flying. Now, subsequently, he said he did it on purpose, but there's no way he did it on purpose. It was either booze or drugs that caused him to do it. So something was going on. So yeah, it's either substance abuse or it's alcohol. It's one or the other that I think he's singing about or writing about here.
Okay, so the next song is the big, epic, major hit in the army now. One of Quo's biggest songs. What do you think of this?
I hated it then and I hate it now. It's just not Quo. I mean, let's be fair to Quo. They don't care what I think. It got to number 2, as you say. It's one of their biggest hits. It's probably the reason that this is seen as a comeback album, because I suspect that's what actually drove it into the charts. It was the 3rd single, and they were floundering, really. So I think it took them back from maybe the core Quo fans like myself who were sticking with them, and got them back into the general public's consciousness. But yeah, I just don't like. I mean, it's obviously a cover version. The original was by a band called Bolland and Bolland. It went to number 1 in Norway, but not heard anywhere else. I've never heard the original until I prepared for this show, and it sounds very similar. It's more synth, but the rest of it sounds pretty similar. But yeah, to me, it's just not Quo. It's not what they should be doing. It's not what they sound like. But as I say, they don't care what I think. It got them back into the charts at number 2. Well, got them back into the high levels of the chart at number 2, and got them back onto being a household name. And I think they stayed there for the next few albums as well. So yeah, I'm sure they don't care what I think, but didn't like it, still don't like it.
Yeah, I'm going to sit on the fence. I don't know if I like it or not. It's an unusual song because there's no chorus. It's just verse. And there's a bit of a build-up. And the build-up in the song is through the lyrics. And it's about the different phases of somebody joining the army. And, it decidedly takes a more anti-war focus as it gets deeper into the lyrics about, the horrors of war and how army folk are just cannon fodder. So from a lyrical perspective and storytelling, that's a positive because it takes you on a journey and it reveals itself. And it's definitely a lot deeper than a lot of the songs on this album. But melodically, it's very simple. It's only a couple of notes. It's very catchy. It's a bit of earwiz. It's certainly been in my ears and my head, unfortunately, or fortunately, since I've been researching for this show. So I'm going to sit on the fence. I can see why it went to number 2. It's got that real sing-along feel. So maybe I'll just ask you a question. Did you see Quo in this era live?
Not on this tour, but I did see them the previous tour, which would have been 83, 84, and I saw them again around about 89, 90, but in 86 I didn't see them, no.
Right. So this song, was that in the song set, and did they do kind of the sing along? You know, the
I'm sure. Well, it's always, yeah. Ever since, it's always been in the song set. So, and to be fair, it does go down well with the crowd.
Yep.
You know, sometimes that when the hits come up, you kind of get a lot of the hardcore fans booing, don't you? Or sort of walking out to go and get a beer or whatever. But you don't tend to get that. So I think people have accepted it. I mean, I agree with what you say about the lyrics, but I think it's a bit like Springsteen with Born in the USA. I think most people don't actually realise it's an anti-war song. And certainly the way Quo sing it doesn't, they don't sing it in a way that makes you realise it's not, you know, they're not like a Bob Dylan when they're singing it, are they, making it this thing. It just sounds, I mean, to me, it just sounds very bland. It even for Quo, it's, you know, Quo haven't got the best of vocals, you know, they've got decent vocals, but they're not the best vocalists. But even in Quo's terms, this singing sounds very bland and monotone. And I think any positive that maybe the lyrics and the tone of the song has just get lost because you can't. It's not, people don't hear it, they don't see it. So
it's got a very.
But to be fair, the original's not much different. I mean, if you go to the original, that doesn't give you the same. Doesn't give you a different feel. It is very similar to the original.
Yeah, it's vocally, it's very matter of fact, isn't it? But do you maybe to counterpoint that, the matter of fact delivery of the vocal line makes the lyrics much more effective in getting the message across, because people can actually listen to the words and hear it. There's no sort of being overly dramatic with the lyrics. Maybe that may detract from the message and what the lyrics are saying. But if you just sing it matter of fact, the listener's actually focusing on the lyrics and going on the journey. So that's my counterpoint to it. I really sit on the fence on this song. I just...
And as I say, I'm clearly in a minority for the general public, because it was a huge hit and does seem to be generally liked. And I think, I mean, I said earlier that if I'd heard, you know, that I bought it after the second single. If this had been the first single, I'd never bought the album. I dislike it that much. So, and it's interesting that it wasn't the first or second single, although maybe because they were Dave Edmund produced, maybe they were produced before the rest of the album was done, and I can't remember the timing of it all. But yeah, look, I'm in a minority. I'm sure that, you know, people who are watching this will give us their comments, but I suspect quite a lot of people like it. And it's as you say, I guess it showed Quo in a slightly different light, and also goes back to that review that you did from Smash Hits, that just again shows that it wasn't an album full of typical Quo songs, because this isn't a typical Quo song. It is very different, or very different for them. So you know, another positive that for others that it does show that they can do something a bit different.
Yeah, well,
but I don't like it. I still don't like it.
Yeah. Well, that just goes to show with some of these Smash Hits reviews, maybe they don't even listen to the whole album, and they've sort of written it before it's actually been reviewed. But that's for another day. We'll talk about it. This song certainly touched a nerve, but I'm sitting on the fence. I just don't know whether I like it or not, because I can see some positives, but I'm not completely sold.
Well, and it was a hit all over Europe. I mean, interesting you said it wasn't a hit in Australia, but it was a hit all over Europe. So it wasn't just the UK. It got top 5 in most countries in Europe. So it was a smart move by them, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I've never done that on any of my shows where I've just sat on the fence, and I'm sitting on the fence. I can see pros and cons on this, and I don't know whether I like it or not at this point in time. Anyway,
but you're right; it's definitely an earworm.
It is because it's so simple.
Yeah,
it's so simple. Melodically, it's not a challenging song, and it's all about the build-up. And it's really the melody is servicing the lyrics, which is strange for a Quo song, because Quo's not really lyrics 1, music 2. It's the other way around. So it's flipped over. It's the whole mythology of Quo is flipped around for this song. And kudos, whoever chose this song. It's out of the box, it's left field, but it worked for them.
Yeah, definitely.
So in 1986, and that was the perfect way to sort of get a new audience and get them reviewed in smash hits, because I don't know if their previous albums would ever be reviewed in smash
good
hits.
Point. Yeah, no, good point.
Dreamin, what do you think of this song?
Yeah, so you flip over the album hoping maybe it's better, but it's not with this one. Again, not keen on Dreaming. Another one of these bland pop Quo songs. It was a single, got to number 15, came out after In the Army Now. But again, I'm not overly keen on it. I have to say, though, there's a musical interlude in the middle. I won't call it a solo, because it's not really a solo, but there's this kind of musical interlude in the middle, which is actually quite interesting. I quite like that. And that probably elevates it up slightly from being something I just don't like at all. But generally, yeah, again, as I say, just bland pop Quo and not very keen.
Grandma Rock. That's what I wrote.
Yeah.
That's another granny song. And I think it's a third generation version of Dire Straits' Walk of Life. I'm not a big fan of that song, but it's actually, a cousin or a son, a bastard son of that song, but a lot worse.
Yeah.
So, and it's got those horrible synth horns. The synth in this album, not good. I think a lot of bands in this day used whatever was the latest synth sounds, not realizing that it actually dates their album. And a lot of great classic bands, Status Quo withstanding, were doing it, like Deep Purple, House of Blue Light, or The Blue Light. John Lord was using a lot of more modern synth sounds and dates the album.
It's interesting, isn't it? So it's Andy Brown on keyboards, and he's only been recently officially a member of the band in the early 80s, but he goes right back to those classic era, playing piano and keyboards, synth, etc. So it's not as if they've got a synth pop guy in to do that. They've got a bit like your comment about John Lord. It's almost like they were mesmerized that all of a sudden keyboards was to the front, that in the 80s people were interested in, so they kind of, I don't know, lost control almost and became manic with what they did. Because I like Andy Brown. I think he's a good player, and certainly albums before and later albums as well, I think he's really good. But during this period they've just followed what everybody else did, and it's not imaginative, it's not particularly innovative, and as you say, just makes it sound really dated.
Okay, End of the Line. What do you think of this?
Oh, wow. This is more like it. In fact, I wish they'd started side 2 with this, because I think if they'd started side 2, you'd really lift you up. So yeah, I really like this. I think it's it builds nicely. It's got a really good intro. It's got a kind of a long intro, bit like the 70s Quo would have. I like the guitar riff. The vocals are great, particularly on the chorus. They go quite high pitched on the vocals in the chorus, which is a bit different for Quo. Really like that. It's another Rick Parfitt song, as I mentioned earlier. He seems to be still wanting to do a bit of rocking rather than just doing this, as you call it, grandma pop rock stuff. So yeah, really like it. It's up there as one of my favourite songs in the album. It's got a good solo as well, really good. Is it as good as classic Quo? Probably not, but it's still a very good song, and certainly one of my favourites. And yeah, this is what I wish they were doing more of on this album.
I agree with you. Absolutely. I think this is one of the better songs on the album. It's got a hooky chorus. It has a lot of urgency. It's interesting, and it sounds contemporary. It's not boogie rock, but it just sounds like a contemporary rock song. And I don't know, for some reason I was listening to this song and thinking, gee, Mel Galley from Trapeze would really I could imagine him singing this song. It'd be a really interesting take. I don't know. My brain was just going left field because it's been assaulted by a lot of the songs on this album, and I was just going off on tangents. But I really, really like this song because out of all the songs here that sound a little bit dated, a little bit tired, even though you've got a lot of mayonnaise with the modern synth sounds, this one sounds contemporary. And I agree with you. It would have been an interesting direction for the band if they did more of this.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so the next song is Invitation.
I don't know. I'm not sure I like it. Or you talk about sitting on the fence. I guess I'm going to sit on the fence a little bit with this one. I appreciate it's different. Got a bit of a country sound to it. Got a bit of country guitar. It's a bit bluesy. So from that point of view, at least they're trying something different. They're not just doing what they've done on the other songs. I just think again, it's just a bit bland. Really, it's nothing special. But yeah, at least they've tried something a bit different. And I quite like the country guitar on it.
I think it's dire. It really is. Yeah, country rock. So next,
Right.
Red Sky.
Well, this was the song that got me to buy the album, to be fair. This was the second single, again, written by John David of Dave Edmunds' band, produced by Dave Edmunds. The riff I really like. The riff reminds me a bit of Tush by ZZ Top, actually. It's got a kind of similar sound to that. So I really like the riff. Again, wish the rest of the album was like this, really. When I heard this on the radio, and having already heard Rolling Home, which I liked, I thought, oh, great, Quo are really back to their rocking ways, and I rushed out and got it. That was the reason I bought it. So, yeah, really like this. Production's good, as I said before. I like the Dave Edmunds production. Interesting that an external writer writes the best Quo song on the album. Yeah, love it. I think it's really good. So that's my view on Red Sky.
Well, we're in a fair amount of agreement tonight. I think this has got a real ZZ Top feel. Perhaps a direction that they should have done, albeit maybe a little bit too late, because ZZ Top, in 83, 84, had done that. I mean, it's got that metronomic bottom end with the rock guitars and the vocal. It's almost danceable. It's kind of a souped up boogie, and it propels along. So I think this is a really interesting track, and it's a direction that I wish Status Quo probably pursued, and would have been much more interesting than some of the synth pop confections on this album. So I agree with you. It's outstanding. But this track only went number 19. So
19, yeah. Well, that I was going to say, from Quo's point of view, do you want do you want a song that gets to number 19 or a song that gets to number 2? And I guess back then they would have been, if they were looking at that and trying to decide a direction moving forward, you can see why they went that other direction, leaning towards the poppier stuff. If they were looking for, particularly if they were looking to make back the money they'd probably spent in the early 80s on substance abuse. So you can kind of understand why they went in a different direction. But I wish they'd stuck with this. I think it's really good.
Would it be fair to say that Status Quo had a fair amount of family appeal? That they're the sort of band that were kind of dangerous. So, the Parish, your father and mum and, grandma would probably dig and groove on Status Quo. Do you think they had a lot of family, broad, mainstream?
Yeah, I do. I think the reason for that is, if you go back to the 70s, certainly my dad had been a teddy boy back in the 50s, and his music was rock and roll. My mum's music had been more film soundtracks, like I don't know, South Pacific, that kind of stuff. So my dad was a rocker, not a rocker as you and I would think of it, but an old school rock and roller. So he liked Quo, not every song, but he could see Quo, like a few bands of the early 70s, had that feel for rock and roll. I mean, my dad liked Dave Edmunds as an example, and you can understand why. So yeah, I think there was an appeal to the generation older than me, because they were rock and rollers at heart, Quo, and therefore not unlike some bands that came on where my parents would be shaking their heads. Quo wasn't one of those. Yeah, but certainly my dad. Um, yeah, quite appreciated. So I think that next generation up, Quo had an appeal. So from that point of view, and I think that's why Quo have lasted. I mean, there's not very many bands that transcend from being seen as a genre to just being national, sort of national
Treasure.
sort of, I don't know what's treasures. Yeah, that's the phrase I was looking for. But Quo's one of them, and almost everybody knows Status Quo. I mean, the Parfit and Rossi are personalities, or were personalities in Parfit's case. They were regularly on the telly. They'd be on the old grey whistle test one night, and then 2 nights later they'd be on the Two Ronnies. It was that kind of sort of appeal that they had. So yeah, definitely they had a much broader appeal than most of the bands around that time, and I think that goodwill carried them through into the 80s. So I think people wanted them to succeed, and I think that was part of the appeal of it in the army. Now the song, I think they still had a fan base amongst a wider reach, so that people knew Quo, they liked the song, they'd go out and buy it, whereas maybe they wouldn't have done if it had been by a different artist.
Well, I think you're spot on. I think you had a lot of the mums and dads and grandmas that would have bought In the Army Now because it had that sort of mainstream appeal. I think Quo would be the sort of band that would probably be in a Royal Command performance, wouldn't they?
Definitely.
I'm not sure they ever played it, but
I don't know, but I'd be really surprised if they hadn't.
Yes. Yeah. So next song is a cover of an Ian Hunter song called Speechless. So what do you think of this?
Yeah, I like this. I mean, I was familiar with the Ian Hunter song, so I knew it. I prefer the original, but I think it's a decent version. I like the vocals. You mentioned earlier about one of the songs having interesting vocals. I think Quo try to follow the Ian Hunter kind of vocals on it, so that makes it a bit more quirky and a bit more interesting. I wrote down, actually, it reminded me a bit of the Cars, the sound to the song. So a bit new wavy, sort of early 80s new wave, but that same kind of vocal style as well. So yeah, a decent enough song, and certainly I quite enjoy it. Yeah, quite like it. Not as good as the original, but a decent cover of it, I think.
Yeah, I think this is a bit of a bland version. I think they sucked the soul out of it. It's got that bells and whistles technology, and I think this is one where the production and all the sonics just really take the joy out of it, take the soul out of it. So it's a little bit soulless, a little bit, I don't know, a bit plastic. So Speechless is not for me. And then you've got the final song, the finale, called Overdose, and you've got Rick Parfit on vocals. So
yeah, another Parfit song. Yeah, so another Parfit song. I mean, another autobiographical song, I think, in the lyrics. Guitars are turned up, synthesizer turned down, which is a good thing. Again, good introduction to it. I think it finishes off the album really well. It rocks along. It kind of builds and then gets rocking and sort of slows down again. But yeah, I think it's a decent song. I really like it. And again, as I said earlier, the direction I wish Quo was going in at this time, and certainly my view is Parfit was still the rocker at this stage. You look at the 3 songs he wrote, there was still something in it. But you look at the songs that Rossi was involved in, and they're going this popball grandma rock way. So definitely sort of conflicting. It's a bit like Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, I think, at times, where they were taking Kiss in different directions on an album. And I think you've got a bit of that here. But yeah, I really like it. I think it finishes the album well. And I just, again, wish there was more of this type of song on the album.
Yeah, I'm not as convinced as you are, because I think this song goes in so many different directions. And I don't think there's a hook in it that really gives me enough to chow down on, because I love songs that have got hooks. And even in the Status Quo world, there's a hook, with their boogie rock. But there's a lot going on, But at the end of the day, when you finish hearing this song, there's nothing I can chow down on. There's no sort of recall. One thing's for sure, I think Rick has a really compelling vocal, and he gives his all to it. And in fact, I think that, his vocals and the energy he gives this song gives it more than it probably deserves. There's cheesy synth stabs that doesn't hold together. There's triple track vocals that remind me of Queen, the backing vocals. It bounces from a song arrangement from, different sort of time signatures. It's kind of all over the shop. It's everything but the kitchen sink. So it's an epic song, but I just can't sort of chow down on it. It just doesn't have a hook into me.
Well, I was going to say, compared with the rest of the album, maybe that's it. When you've heard a lot of what's gone before, you get to this, and for me, I'm thinking, oh yeah, this isn't bad actually, because as you say, at least they're trying something different. It is a bit experimental. If it'd been on one of the earlier Choir albums, it probably wouldn't stand up there for me. But just because of everything else, well, not everything, but just because of quite a lot of it, what's around it, I think this sounds pretty good, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there you have it, folks. There's 11 tracks. So I'll flick over to you, Parish. In 2024 ears, what do you think of this album?
I think it's an album of two halves. I think the rockers are good. So Rolling Home, End of Line, Red Sky, Overdose. I think they're really good. If the rest of the album had been like that, I would really like it. The production on the two Dave Edmunds songs are really good, but I just don't like the other song, the other half of it, which, as I say, is just too bland, too poppy, very. Could be done by almost anybody, really, and even that chug sort of guitar sound that they have throughout, it is very generic. It is very watered down. That it's just not. And one of the characteristics of why I like Quo so much generally is they have such interesting introductions normally to songs. They have really, epic coming in before they get into the groove. And I think there's only one or two songs like that on this album, or even remotely like it. Most of them are just straight into the song with a very bland introduction. So an album of two halves. The half are like, well, it's not even a half, but the 40% or whatever of what I do like, I think is reasonably strong. But the rest of it, if I never hear it again, I wouldn't mind.
And what would you give it out of 10?
Out of 10, 4.
Yeah.
Because as I say, it's not quite half. It's not quite half of it that I like. So yeah, probably 4 out of 10.
Yeah. I don't think it's a very good album. There's a couple of decent songs, but I think overall they got overawed by technology. It's too slick. Sonic choices are kind of misguided, ill-conceived, and it sounds very dated. And that's ironic, talking about Status Quo and this album being dated. It's the technology that dates it, because I actually prefer the classic sound of Status Quo, and I miss the grungy, raw, crunchy sounds, the ragged glory of the 70s. And, they were mighty, they were great songs, fantastic arrangements, and they rocked. But this album doesn't rock, and it's chasing a different mainstream audience, and they're sort of forgetting what Status Quo is all about. A lot of bands were like that. They just forgot, who are we? And in the quest for more sales.
It must be hard, though, mustn't it? That your big band during the 70s, one of the certainly biggest bands in Europe, and then suddenly you go off a cliff, the band split up, two members try to keep going. The record company are obviously investing in it. And it must be so tempting to go for that sort of poppier, more commercial sound. And as we know, a lot tried and it didn't work for them, actually. A lot of them tried this alternative styling. At least for Quo, it worked. So I guess from their point of view, they can justify what they did. But I don't think until about, well, certainly not until the early 2000s did they get back to making decent albums again. I think I can't remember which one it kicked it off, but I think early 2000s onwards that there's the albums have got some really good stuff on it, but there was a period of probably 15 years where I just never go and listen to any of their stuff. So
yeah, well, they're not the first band in the 80s that lost their way and just got overawed by the technology. But like you look at a band like ZZ Top and Eliminator, where that was such a mega hit, but when you listen to it and you remove the synth and you move the drum tracks, you still hear the classic sound of ZZ Top. You still hear the boogie, the guitar licks. It's ZZ Top, but it's embellished. But with something like this, there's just so many, stylings that are completely outside the status quo wheelhouse that are going for that pop audience, and it's just not Quo. And it just you basically
well, I think
they're swimming with the other fishes in the pop world.
absolutely. I was going to say that the other big difference is I think with ZZ Top, they were innovating. They did it because they were using the technology to enrich what they were doing anyway. And as you say, you strip it back, there's still some great songs in there.
Yes,
And certainly if you saw them live, or they did a kind of quasi live release a few years ago, which included those songs without all of the synth, and they just sound like great songs. But I think Billy Gibbons was doing it because he liked the technology. He was pushing boundaries. He was doing something different. Whereas Quo is just following everybody else. By '86, all they're doing is sounding like Duran Duran or Spandau Ballet or as I said earlier, Bucks Fizz. There was nothing in there that was innovative. So I think, and also, I don't think the songs came first. I mean, when I was researching this and I read a couple of interviews, Rick Parfitt says the biggest problem with this album was that it's just full of filler. The songwriting is just not there. And I think he's right. I think that is probably, we can say everything else about the production and everything, but if they'd had really good songs, we probably wouldn't be saying quite the same thing.
Yeah. Well, there you have it. I give it a 3 out of 10. And that might be a little bit generous, but 3 out of 10 for me. Anyway, I love Quo, but this is not the Quo for me. So there you
Absolutely.
go.
100% agree.
Great having you on the show. Parish of Rock. You can see Parish of Rock on the Contrarians and a lot of other channels. Just put in Parish of Rock. He is a regular contributor to Rock Daydream Nation. If you like this show, please like it. Please give it a sub. It really helps the show and the channel per se. Love reading comments. Tell us what you think of this Status Quo album. I'd like to hear what your favorite Status Quo album is, favorite song. All comments are welcome. So one thing's for sure, you'll see Parish and myself doing more shows in 2024 and 2025. We'll see you soon on Rock Daydream Nation. Cheers.